Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Zeitlin. I'm the director of City Lore, and I'm proud to say I'm a very good friend of Marc's from many, many years back. We're standing here in the relatively new City Lore Gallery. The exhibit is called What We Bring. It's about new immigrants, and each one of them is pictured with an object of theirs that they brought from their home countries. And we're trying to make the point that the cultural gifts of immigrants are what's significant. And that's what we should be talking about today. And somebody asked me, was this a conscious reaction to the Trump administration, or was it unconscious? Well, I'd have to say it was conscious.
It really was.
And I've known Marc really since we did a tribute to Barbara Meyerhoff in 1985, which was the very first City Lore event of all time. So I've known him. Our friendship is as old as City Lore. To give you a sense of some of what we've done, when my son turned 13. We have a mixed marriage, and we decided to have kind of a coming-of-age party to him rather than a formal bar mitzvah. And the rabbi in charge was Marc, giving his talk on what it means to be a mensch. And Marc has always been kind of a creative partner with me in many of the things I've done, always kind of forcing me to work at the outer limits of my intelligence and pushing me further and further. I started my book on Jewish stories from a line in Marc's work, one of his poems, which I think actually is echoed in this book as well. It was family life, Marc told me. Simchas and not such simchas, but it was always a tish mention, a table with people. No. And that's what I think what's the name of the book? One of your books, right?
Right. Yeah.
I won't read all of Marc's biography, but he's the author of 8 previous books of poetry: The Road from Hiroshima, Daily Bread, Kafka's Acts, Voices Within the Ark, The Modern Jewish Poets, Atomic Ghosts, and the Oxford Book of Aging, and edited a lot of Barbara Meyerhoff's papers and works as well, in a number of wonderful books. The book that we're reading, we're all reading today, hopefully. You can get a copy if you don't already have it, and we're going to be hearing today. In reading it, he sent it to me a few days ago. I was just reading it today, and I realized that it's so, people always talk about the book coming from the soul, but this almost seems like the page is like a membrane of the soul that Marc is pushing against, and it's very deep and profound. And just to give you, if you don't have a sense of what I mean, I will turn you over to Marc Kaminsky and his poetry. Thank you.
I can't tell you how happy I am to see each and every one of you. You are all my family and friends, and you are my beloved community. It's in this room. As we were driving here over Manhattan Bridge, my wife Maddie, who you'll hear more in the book, said to me, "Let your words embrace everyone who comes." And I felt, as so often, that she perfectly grasped and articulated my desire. A few months ago, I went to a reading and heard the poet Richard Hoffman introduce his set by saying, "I always start with a poem I love by a poet I love." And he read Marge Piercy's wonderful poem, To Be of Use. He then read his work, and I was blown away by it. It was unpublished work. I went up to him after the reading, and I said, "Would you consider giving me the sheaf of unpublished poems you read from? I want to be near these poems.
Oh.
I want to be able to take them in and ingest them." He said, "Of course." A generous soul. And that's how I came to have Richard Hoffman's Last Hope, which I'm going to read to you now at the start of this reading. If you ever come, my dreamed of world, the one we almost had, I will be gone with all the others. After all the waiting on wooden benches outside in the hall, after the clicking of heels on polished tile, after the furious shuffling of papers and the endless arguments over money, bring with you people refreshed by love, disposed to wonder, surprised at cruelty. Improbable world I once believed in, rising from words like steam from a bowl of soup. World like an egg in a nest of best debris. If against all odds you take shape one day, bring people whose hearts are less hesitant, new people, better people than we were. A cleft in the rock is the biblical image of refuge in the desert, in the midst of mass migration from the land of oppression. The book is about my own private exodus in search for sanctuary in a world that felt alien to me. My 4 grandparents physically left the old world, but tried to rebuild it here in the Yiddishist movement, a now largely forgotten language-based form of cultural nationalism. It took 2 more generations to make the difficult crossing out of our immigrant enclave to the larger society. The book traces my own belated personal journey to America, which was at one and the same time a journey to love in a marriage where my wife Maddie and I are friend and dear friend, 2 in a deep-founded sheltering. This overarching trajectory links the 4 parts of the book. Each part centers on my relationship with a key person in my life: brother, father, wife, friend. The life story retold here offers indirect and direct testimony about the worlds I traversed in healing ghetto wounds and becoming a grown-up. In his book, poetically titled "And Our Face is My Heart, Brief as Photos," John Berger speaks of the labor of poetry as reassembling the sphere of intimacy that is torn apart and destroyed by separation and violence, by the world we live in. Through metaphors that connect separated things and the reach of a feeling that transcends time and space, this labor is a form of resisting, or at least offering a refuge from, the brutality of the world. Berger writes, "Never before our time have so many people been uprooted. Emigration, forced or chosen across national frontiers or from village to metropolis, is the quintessential experience of our time." This is the historical context of his meditation on poetry. He writes, "One can say anything to language. This is why it is a listener closer to us than any silence or any God. Yet its very openness can signify indifference. The indifference of language is continually solicited and employed in bulletins, legal records, communiques, files. Poetry addresses language in such a way as to close this indifference and incite a caring. Poetry makes language care because it renders everything intimate. This intimacy is the result of the poem's labor, the result of bringing together into intimacy of every act and noun and event and perspective to which the poem refers. there is often nothing more substantial to place against the cruelty and indifference of the world than this caring. Part one of this book is dedicated to the memory of my brother Akiva, who died of a massive heart attack in 1986 at the age of 41. I'm going to read a long excerpt from a long narrative lamentation titled Days of Kivi. It was written in 1969 when Kivi was 23 and I was 25. I went on revising it for the next 46 years, longer than Kivi was alive. This is the first time I'm reading it in public, and in preparing for the reading was the first time I ever read it aloud. So this is in fact only the third time that anyway. Part of the process of finishing an unfinishable work. The poem describes the household in which we grew up, caught in the double bind between our parents' cosmopolitan cultivation and progressive politics on the one side, and their conservative psyches stamped made in the shtetl on the other. Between their demand that we achieve great things in the world and their condemning us for betraying them if we tried to leave home. Reality was muddled between idealizing myths regarding the Yiddishist concept of person, the mensch whose caring sustains and repairs the world, and the hidden Cain and Abel rivalries that damaged our parents as well as our lives. A few notes. Riva is the name of our sister. Rita was the woman to whom I was married in the late 60s. Baba means grandmother in Yiddish. Mold and fiasco refers to an event recounted earlier when Kivi was seen talking to a 12-year-old girl on the street. Already under suspicion as a bearded Jew hippie, he was beaten up and driven out of town, returning to 3 paralyzed months on Mama's sofa. The excerpt I've selected begins in the middle of the poem and comes to an abrupt halt in the crisis at the heart of the poem. In this crisis, the myths that bound us to an illusory home were shattered, and Kivi and I each sat out alone on our own separate diaspora to find a world to live in, to find out who we were. Here then is a portrait of the anguished, extravagant, extraordinarily gifted man who was my brother. With clenched fists, you tell of all-night meets at Bickford's taking on all comers, with one-upping the Shakespeare scholar at the West End bar, the novelist at Rienzi's, stealing the medical student state at Carnegie Hall, doing lines of coke at the Port Authority bus terminal, with the Louisiana runaway you picked up at the Grand Central Station, kept a few days, and turned over to your buddy, with City College girls from Riverdale, drawing lots using cruel methods. You end each episode in silent fury or a short burst of laughter, throwing down a challenge. Can you beat this? With your universal erudition making you fit to take on Professor H, who gave you a C on your Troilus paper. With dropping out of the CUNY doctoral program to concentrate on your opera career. With your recitals in nursing homes interrupted by occasional thuds, canes dropping out of palsied fingers, rows and rows of white hair or blue-tinted or bald heads, nodding in time, beaming up at you, adoring your full young basso. With Papa in the peach-colored auditorium, eating you up with Bubba taking credit after the concert, with your voice still filling the room with memories of voices still in bloom, with the tenderness in you coming out, finding a haven among the old ones, with singing Leporello's arias in the subway, zapping the rush hour, with a courteous word to a cursing salesman, zapping the bourgeois mentality, with your zap gun ready for use at Cousin Harriet's wedding, with frantic subway excursions to the Bronx to conduct hearings in the case of Papa, with acts of inquest, with orphanage silences, with your breakfasts on Sunday morning at Bubba's and open secret, driving Mama to fits of jealous shrink talk, with egging on Reva to make it with your pals, with your 10 by 10 cubicle in an SRO brownstone off Central Park West, your home since the Malden fiasco, with hardly enough room to get to your dining room table, the piano stool, with gates on your windows, grand ballroom ceilings, 18-foot-high bookcases towering on either side of the upright piano like the facade of a Gothic cathedral in miniature, with late-night TV, days you speak to no one but your mirror, with your spanking new dungarees topped by a starched white shirt with black bow tie, antique gold watch chain draped over your stomach, a graduation gift from the folks, with your Einstein hair, with your letters to famous men of letters, winning respectful responses to your theoretic, with Marshall McLuhan and Theodore Reich encouraging you to continue your investigations, with your pot in a cheese box on your windowsill. With the mystical poetry you write, you plow up asphalt and tarmac and release lost spirits re-enchanting the world. With your mafia supplier meeting you at the Hadassah Bazaar. With dealing ounces cut right to the cognoscenti at small press book fairs and to your regulars on the corner of Columbus and 83rd, with your appreciative laugh coming a bit too soon, with making the rounds at all hours, getting thrown out of Mama's house for acting weird, making insulting remarks just before the dinner guests were due to arrive, dignitaries from the world of Jewish communal service. Trying Bubba's next, looking to score a salvific connection, nothing doing. From there back up Gun Hill Road under the Woodlawn Jerome tracks past the cemetery. To Riva at Norman's near the reservoir, crazy with cold, shoes soaked through by the snow, freaking them out in no time. And so, turning up at my place a day later in the slush dead of winter. An old Russian army greatcoat thrown over your shoulders, one of the hand-me-downs you got from me, worn like a mantle, empty sleeves dangling, fists pounding against my door, crying, "Brother! Brother! 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 Open up!" Kiwi, you went crazy believing my hex was the real power blocking your genius career. You cracked up in December 1968, you unraveled me, marching through my doorway like General de Gaulle, under the Arch of Triumph, passing through my rooms as if they were old Nazi headquarters, looking into cabinets and closets for evidence, sniffing into Rita's underwear drawer. When you got the shakes and tore the royal red comforter from our bed and wrapped it around you, your face frozen and glaring, ordering tea, demanding I serve you, speaking incomprehensible sophistries in a Richard Tucker profundo, between conundrums telling me what a schmuck I am, how you pitied me, what a fool you'd been for submitting to the old law of primogeniture blinded to your own stature, you, the all-round man and match of anyone you might meet in the night of your wanderings, grand unmasker of lies, emigrant who made the crossing out of family exile into plowshare Zion, with hatred radiating out of your monumentality, a shape disembodied by robes, immobile, ghastly. You said, I ripped off your brainwaves. You had come back for them. When you stripped and wriggled nakedly around the kitchen, flapping your hands, singing a little falsetto reprise, la-di-day, then folded your legs under you suddenly like a camel and sat at my feet, looking up with mocking disciple eyes, which turned to blue ice, declaring tyrannicide. With the knife gleaming on the counter, a pulse away from your right hand, afraid for my life, I saw you at last. I saw you cast off the delusive and wretched sanity that denied you your birthright and assert the truth of every child born, that the last shall come first. I stayed home from work for a week. I was in mourning. Rita held me all night. I wept. I spewed out the stories. Every night for a week she stayed up with me. Stories of how I got the paint sets and the praise. All my guilt at having been favored. What's so unusual about that, Rita said. I told her how Papa had favored my gifts over yours in exchange for the paintings I made. He raised me up in the house as the son in whom his greatness was plainly visible. An old story, Rita said. Crushed by your memories, I cried how you ran after me at age 4, calling my name in Yiddish. I left you behind to play with my friends, the 6-year-olds, who didn't call me Mati. And once, age 8, I went wild with rage. Mama and Papa couldn't pin me down to their bed. With my arms breaking loose, my legs flailing dangerously, my voice hoarse with screaming, I want to kill Kiwi! I want to kill him! How human. How human, Rita said. From part 2, I'm going to read the first poem in the sequence titled Displaced Persons. Displaced Persons. Every night I fell asleep traveling in my father's song, to the east, to the west. In the east, he taught me death. In the west, he taught me death. He sang of going under in the black fires of Warsaw and the crematoria. He sang of being wrapped in white linen in the streets of Laredo and St. James Infirmary. For much of my life, I wasn't here, hypnotized by my father's ghastly lullabies. I traveled on in images and music he made more real to me than my own right hand. Frightened by the dreams my father left me with, I fought sleep in that narrow bed. I imagined myself awake in my coffin. My father's eyes peered over the edge, crying at last. Next thing I knew, I was jammed onto a train to oblivion. The trip went on night after night I'm still traveling there. By day, the children of survivors I work with tell me their dreams. At night, I join them on the unloading ramp. Sticks, clubs, curses. There I wait amid piles of suitcases. Later, emptying and sorting them, I see my father's book of Psalms and bottle lens reading glasses. Amid my father's captivating lamentations, I was most himself, the one displaced into the one who listens. Over time, I trained my absence to become a warehouse of the past, where others with a kindred malaise could wander around to claim a self among the heaps of baggage abandoned by parents who lost sight of them, of us. We don't remember when and how we were condemned to live, with something that obstructs our movements, something we collide against in hallways, streets, bedrooms. We are desperate to throw our arms around it and drag it to the mirror where hunger to own its existence could conceivably force it back into attachment with its personal shape. Yet, it goes on eluding our grasp. A black cloth covers each mirror in our house, and every time our hands reach out to pull it down, we shrink back in confusion, lest we meet our own permanent loss of face. Part 3 is titled Sanctuary and carries this epigraph from Siddhartha Mukherjee's The Emperor of All Maladies. The word metastasis, used to describe the migration of cancer from one site to another, is a curious mix of meta and stasis, beyond stillness in Latin, an unmoored, partially unstable state that captures the peculiar instability of modernity. Cancer is an expansionist disease. It invades through tissues, sets up colonies in hostile landscapes, seeks sanctuary in one organ before immigrating to another. I'm going to read 3 poems from this part. In sickness as in health. Before bed, I move 2 chairs from the dining room table and place them face to face. I wash my hands and sit down with you. You unbutton your shirt and lift your bra, and I reach up and pitch the tube at the point where it enters your skin. The site where 20 lymph nodes were removed and a catheter sewn into the wound is too tender to be touched. I take great care not to pull on the sutures. The slightest pressure on the sensitive area brings pain. I stop and start over again. With the thumb and forefinger of my other hand, the left one, I squeeze the clots and milk the reddish-white fluid into the suction cup, which I empty into the measuring container. I record the day's drainage and flush it down the toilet. I've always been terribly queasy, but I knew, as the nurse was showing me how to care for your wound, that this procedure would be transformed by my tenderness and your trust into an act of utmost intimacy. Metastasis. In the privacy of our home, the incision site goes on leaking longer than expected. Whitish bits mixed with blood have you worried. Our world contracts to the areas of your wounds and the appointed times of caring for them and meeting your doctors. As we ride through the streets of the Upper East Side, It's hard to remember that we are in the same city, where we marched against one invasion after another for 45 years. And the site of 9/11 remains a vast hole, a battleground where money people and other power brokers fight over the shape of meaning they want to impose on our memory of the event. In whichever segregated, unstable domain I imagine us standing, in public or private, we are adrift among proliferating ominous signs. Wisteria. I sit down at a small table with your cancer on my mind, besotted by sadness. 2 days after your latest surgery, and you're back at work. Your door open to students who come and go, bringing you trouble they can talk over with no other adult. Work you love more than ever. And I sit facing the wall with my fingers on the keys of my wheelwriter. I go back to the room where you're tortured by the treatment that keeps you alive. Stuck with needles, tied to a chemo chair. I join you there, give you ice to suck on, stroke your hair, but the comfort I want to bring you doesn't suffice to stop the pain. The scene changes. Now I'm with you at a wrought iron table in our garden. The fence is transformed by a vine into a veil of white blossoms. Wisteria is gradually tearing it down while holding open house for bees. Its branches writhe through slats, tearing them apart and flowering on both sides of the fence. You catch my eyes narrowing on the damage and take my hand in yours. A storm passes between your body and mine, a shudder that marries destruction and awakening to more life. Part 4 describes a trip I made to be with my friend Paul Gorin at an important turning point in his life. In fulfillment of his dream of providing care to the underserved population of his neighbors, he opened a medical office in rural Delaware. I went down there to stand with him at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. After the event, Paul said, "Come, there's a place I want to show you. I go there when I need to commune with the forces Darwin saw moving through all of nature." He took me to a wildlife sanctuary called Herring Point, a spit of land between Delaware Bay and the seemingly endless unrolling of time coming at you at waves out of the Atlantic under the night sky. The return. I awoke today in the middle of a dream. A forest of towering spruce screened me from the shoulder where we pulled off the road and parked a month ago outside the gate to Herring Point. I'd walked into the dark woods so that no one could see or hear me pissing. Yet the grasses shivering on all sides of me took shape as an Iroquois hunter running unseen through the centuries. Within earshot, I was at the mercy of a master of surprise and speed and invisible survival in this place where I was ill-equipped to live, a child again, trembling as he encircled me to protect his land from my casual desecration of it. By the time I zipped up my fly and rushed back to the road, I had no memory of my encounter with him. But early this morning, he came back to me in a dream as the spirit of the place, who opened me to the wonder and terror of Herring Point. And I lived through my night there again from the beginning. Details that were blurred when we moved through them came into focus. Black letters there to arrest us, leapt from the yellow sign. No trespassing, no one without a fishing license may enter here. Without a word, we unlatched the gate and set out, making our way through a maze of dunes toward the ocean. The undertone that rattled each of us separately stopped. In its abrupt cessation, we could sense what we had come through. The dread of openness we live with was gone. There was only this tide, this night, this bright moon, these sandpipers writing nervous, indecipherable runes along this shore where we stood, side by side, listening. On this narrow strand, set apart as a sanctuary for wildlife between Delaware Bay and the gray Atlantic, we heard water dispersed in clouds by last week's heat waves and restored to the sea in yesterday's downpour, heaving and soughing as it returned to land. Nothing obstructed the horizon over which no face hovered, yet we lacked nothing. Cool air from limitless expanses brushed our cheeks and went through us, releasing fear that we carried in the stone jar of the lungs, in the knot of the stomach. We ceased holding on to the hunger that eats our capacity for being alive to the world. We stood on the hair's breadth between the sea inside us and the one without, and there was neither the one nor the two of us. And now I wonder, dear friend, what of all this can I retain? Am I falling into my usual error, clinging to the good experience? Is the urge to be exalted the birthright of the soul, or a source of confusion, or something of both? Questions that lead away from the living moment. I stood at a place emptied of hindrances to being at peace, listening to the waves, incessant variations of whooshing and withdrawing under the night sky. Isn't it time I took up residence on the site of loss, in the house of my wavering, my impurity and impermanence? How far I am from that in my own home, trying to shut out small disturbances, my attention broken by Jehovah's Witnesses ringing my bell, cold calls from stockbrokers, the old woman with dyed orange blonde hair, my neighbor starving for a friendly word from passers-by, sits for hours on a beach chair with her little yapping lapdog under my window. How can I remain calm in the midst of such noise? It's a dream to think I can remain anywhere at all. Isn't it time that I gave up striving to keep out the dark I always return to? Time that I took up trespassing into the world I encountered at Herring Point. I'm going to close with a recent poem that is a kind of bookend to Richard Hoffman's poem. It's about excuse me, patching together a world out of debris. This poem is called A Cobbler from Lublin. Just now, the air darkened before my eyes. A passing thought or memory seized my attention. I don't believe in past lives, yet my reverie thinks otherwise. I was back at my bench in Lublin. Yes, that can be no one but me, abstracted from my surroundings, wholly lost in my task, a worn boot held in place between my left hand and my breastbone. My right hand guides the paring knife through the leather I glued on last night. A new soul. Slivers, long and sinewy, shaped like snakes. Broken letters, the excess of sheets of cowhide, drop onto the pile of leftovers cut away from shoes over many years. Small odds and ends I've been saving against the day I find some use for them. They rise up from my ankles to my knees, thousands upon thousands of extravagant bits of promising material. Moving around in my little shop means climbing over mounds of lost inventory, or pushing the proliferating mass from place to clear a path through my tremendous storehouse. Often, in the midst of a routine repair, my eyes fall on a remnant that's nearly star-shaped, or almost a fire poker, or that looks like a rib, or suggests steam rising out of a Sabbath soup, or a miniature of a map of divided Poland, or the double of the head of our rabbi, or a dark brown 10-zloty note among the chips of cow dung, or a glob of ambergris floating on the waves of a tropical sea. And then I find it most painful, most hard to believe that the day still hasn't come when I will have solved the great puzzle of my existence and put all these pieces to use. After all that labor and all those wonderful moments when I saw something emerge at the meeting place of chance and craft and vision, will that die with me when I die? How to make it live again in the minds of those who will toil and rest and number their days in Lublin after I am forgotten. People look at the old shoes that walk out of my workshop into a new life, and they can't see any value in the surplus that lies on the shop floor. I believe in every bit of it. There's a trace of the broken world I need to draw out of invisibility and repair. To those who scream at me, it's useless, get rid of it, you're drowning in waste. It's true you stick to your last, but the mess, the stench, the mold, the dust, I hate stepping into this revolting shop. I say quietly, you wait. Just you wait. And in time, they get tired of trying to persuade me to think otherwise. Perhaps because I'm such a meticulous cobbler, or because I've persisted so long in preserving my scraps, even those who consider me a fanatic regard me with a certain tolerance and admit that Lublin would be poorer without my improbable store of remnants. Happier and more fulfilled than I feel at this moment. You work a lifetime to bring all the pieces of your heart together into a statement that's received by the people who you need to receive it. And you have given me that, and I am deeply grateful to you.